what I want your listeners to take away from this conversation, that I hear this and you would be surprised. Every federal agency is having problems getting businesses to respond to solicitations and grants. They cannot find you. And I know it's shocking to hear, right? And you're saying, I'm out here. I know I was a small business. I'm still a small business. You say, I'm here. You're like, yes, there's a big disconnect between them finding you and you finding them. And so that's what we do. That's why we say we're the bridge for small businesses, bridging that gap.
Welcome, everybody. You are at the Construction MF'ers podcast. I'm Scott Pieper, CEO and co-founder of Mobilization Funding. I'm super excited today to be talking about government contracts. I have a friend and an expert here to talk exactly about that. Eric Coffie is the founder of GovCon Giants. He has an amazing content on YouTube channel. He does all kinds of webinars. And in my opinion, he's probably one of the best, if not the best, creator and understanding person to illustrate what you should do, can do, and how to be successful with government contracting. So Eric, I'm excited to have you on the show, man. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Scott, for having me today. Pleasure. And I appreciate that introduction.
Well, you're welcome, man. I've done my research. I watched quite a few of your videos prior to us even meeting and connecting the first time. And then, one of the things I really liked about you, man, is what you see on your video is exactly who you are in real life too, in person. I mean, not even in person, but when you and I have talked. And since you've connected me to 2, 3, 4 other people, everybody has the same genuine thought process behind you, and you hear the same similar things. So it's funny. I like that about people. It also affirms that I actually still can maybe judge a little bit of a character.
Yeah, judging character is really hard. I will say that's a tough ask of anyone.
You know what's funny? This is not on my list of questions for you, but since you bring that up, is it judge character or trust your gut?
I don't know. That's a hard one. That's tough. I'm sure we've all had situations where we've been let down, right? Unsuspecting. And I'm sure we've all had the opposite situation where we've been surprisingly suspected that we did something that happened that we did not suspect out of a person's character. So I think, maybe it is more of your gut. I think your gut does kind of tell you a lot of things. If I reflect back on the situations where someone, did something that I thought might have disappointed me at that time, right? I'm a little bit different now. I'm a little bit wiser because I do realize now I have more of a stoic take on things. And so if something negatively or adversely impacted me at the time, I now perceive there's for a better, longer term plan. But back then I didn't realize that. And so I was, disappointed or hurt or angered by it. And so had I trusted my gut, I probably would have made a different decision. But again, the older, wiser me is now saying, then I would have reshaped my direction and I might not be where I'm at today.
True. No, well, that's some wisdom right there for sure.
Right. Yeah.
I think I would say similar. It takes a little age or experience. I get experience comes with age, but you're right. Where I was going to is I look back and I say, you know what, that was bad. Am I really surprised? And usually my wife will say to me, well, your gut told you that. I remember you saying this, and then she'll also say, I certainly told you that. And I'm like, I do have a new rule now, though. If my wife has a bad feeling about somebody, that's a hard stop for me. I don't even test it anymore because that's just proven out to be accurate.
And I mean, your wife knows you, right? And she knows you. And no, I do believe that other people oftentimes, and that's why, I surround myself with people that we have different sets of skills because they do see things that you can't do or that you can't see. And for me personally, having, when I started doing government contracting and teaching online, Scott, one of my shortcomings was I was talking over everyone's head. And so the example I gave you, one of my companies was wireless multimedia service provider, right? And people, what is that? And so I would speak that same type of acronym-y type words and terms to folks trying to educate them. And I found that I fell short. So when I got someone on my team that had zero knowledge of government contracting, and they would just stop me and say, hey, this makes no sense. It really did help change the directory and allow me to be able to create content to impact many more people, because we really do have to dummy things down, because you, like, for example, in your area expertise, you've got a particular knowledge, right? And then you've got terms that the industry uses, but that, lay people like myself would not know. And so that's one of my secrets.
Yeah. Talking over someone's head never makes someone feel good, even if you're not intending to do it.
Right.
What makes someone feel good is they heard what you said and all of a sudden understood something that otherwise usually is over their head. That's the juice.
Yeah. So again, I didn't know I was making those mistakes, right? And I had no idea when I first I remember I made my first course and I called it a beginner's course, and they said, "That's not beginner's course." And I go, "What do you mean?" I did not realize when I started talking about government contracts, because I, just between me and you and everybody, whoever's listening, I didn't have a job, right? So I pretty much only worked a job after college. Let's say before college and high school, I had a lot of jobs, but after college, I've only had a job for about like 6 months of my life. And so I was at businesses and companies and things, and I didn't know that people needed to be taught how to set up an LLC, how to get an EIN, like those things. So I skipped past all of those lessons and went straight to how to go after contracts. I didn't even know they needed to be taught how to register in SAM, or the System for Work Management. Like I didn't know that they needed to be taught DUNS number, UEI. Like I didn't know that. I went straight to proposal writing, bidding, estimating, right? That kind of stuff. And so I had to step back, and some people brought that to my attention and said, "Look, wait, before you start writing proposals and like, where do I register? Where do I certify? Where do I qualify? Where do I set up the company?" And so I just didn't know. I was really ignorant.
The foundation down.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Sometimes starting, if things I read, sometimes starting is the hardest part. And if you and I are trying to tell people how to finish,
right?
Start and then whatever the field is, it's not good.
Right.
Well,
right.
Eric, let me jump in this. This is great. This is exactly what I thought was going to happen, jumping into different conversations. But tell the audience and our network here, I want them to know who you are, what GovCon Giants is, and what your goal and mission is.
So I've had some ups and downs in my life, and in 2017, I decided that I wanted to make a difference on the industry, and I felt like the SBA and the government wasn't doing a sufficient job. If you go in, there's some statistics out there by some of the Senate hearing committees that state that the small business participation in government contracting, particularly federal contracting, has been on a steady decline for 2 decades. And so when you look at the numbers, we're talking about 32,000 companies lost for, in terms of working with certain agencies, 24,000, 10,000 respectively, and other federal agencies. We're talking about just the number of businesses that were once vendors that are no longer vendors selling to those same agencies. And so, while the government was doing a lot of terms of throwing a lot of money at the problem, they weren't changing their approach, right? So again, doing the same thing, expecting different results. We know what that leads to. And so that's been their model. Like they just kept throwing money at it and giving to the same people and not really changing their strategy. And so I decided that, again, being a fairly young person at the time, realizing that podcast medium was out there, realizing that the YouTube medium, was out there, I decided that I would share the information and knowledge that I had publicly with everyone. And so I started my YouTube channel in 2017, and then I started my podcast in 2018. And I made it my mission to, and again, I've got all this stuff written down in terms of goals. I can show you from 2019, my goals written down, Scott. And I said, I want to help thousands of people, right? That was my first thing. But specifically when it came to government contracting, I want to help 200 companies achieve $5 million in recurring revenue. And, when I looked at it, it didn't seem like something very far-fetched or unrealistic, because $5 million of revenue for federal contracting is really nothing. It's peanuts. But if you take up the cumulative impact of that, that's $1 billion a year that we pull down. And so again, me as being one person, doing something like that would be a major feat. And so we have right now, we probably have about 20 companies at that $5 million mark. So we're inching our way closer and closer to that mark.
It won't be linear, and I know you know that.
No, of course not. No, it's going to just go, So yeah, it's going to be like this for a long time. And then, one day. But so that was my goal. And so everything around my, like Elon Musk says, he has this, this prism that he operates from. So everything that I do, basically, that's the lens through which I filter it, is getting that 200 companies up to the $5 million a year revenue mark. And so that's why we create content on, unlimited free content on the YouTube channel. I've got over 1,200 videos on the podcast. I've done 5 years of podcasting, and I've interviewed the top small business in the country who come in and share their insights, their thoughts. And so that's why now we're putting together a summit, because there are certain government people that we want to do business with that don't come on social media platforms. And so we've had to create an event, because that's traditional forms of marketing that they know of and they're comfortable with. And so it's easier to get it past legal. So we are now we started, just purely online content. And so we're pulling some of that and we're creating some offline or in-person events. And so that way we can bridge that gap between the small business community and the industrial base, and then those government contract agencies who don't know the players that are out here who wanted to get into this marketplace, but have no idea, because the way that the bureaucratic system is set up, it's so difficult to understand. And it's kind of like a maze that no one gives you the solution for.
Yeah. Speaking of where you start to build your company, or how do you create your company, LLC, then you get to start the process of, where do I even start in the government system?
Right.
You touched on the summit. So let's jump right into that, because I was going to talk about it. So October 11th and 12th in Miami, you're going to have the summit.
Yes.
What can folks expect to learn there? And what would be, hey, I like government contracts. Sounds cool. I want to get into it. Should I go to this summit? What should I expect to learn? And what am I going to take away from there?
So, one of the things that, for me, when I first started government contracting, Scott, that I realized when I was in Miami and I'm doing work at, Homestead Air Force Base, I never met anyone in DC. All the events that I went to were local events with our local municipalities, our local townships, right? The local road project, the local housing projects, but then when as I have, immersed myself into this industry and gotten to know people in DC at different commands like NAVFAC, NAVWAR, NAVAIR, NAVC, Army Futures Command, right? When you start to know people at the, Marines, and they have DLA just alone, Defense Logistics Agency, is putting out 5,000 to 10,000 opportunities per day. Wow. So when you're talking about, DLA and their TOS contract, it's $36 billion. So we, as people that are local, that again, most just humans don't travel, right, more than 10 miles outside their towns. We were never exposed to this kind of stuff. So, as Miami is now becoming the new, high tech, right? The, baby New York, we're getting people out of San Francisco, California, moving down to Miami, because we're having the Bitcoin conference. We're having an NFT conference. We're having blockchain. Also, all the tech companies, again, I tell people, do their research. All of the big investment houses, equity funds, right? Venture capital firms are now moving to South Florida. Mm-hmm. People probably don't know this. All the tech folks are coming here. So I'm telling the government people, because I recognize the needs of trying to build our industrial base. I know the problems. I'm telling the government, hey, you need to be in Miami, right? Where all these tech people are going to be at, talking about your programs and all the opportunities that are coming up, because the tech industry is very disconnected from the government contract industry. In fact, Scott, a lot of times VCs tell their companies, don't go to the government because it's too slow and it's too bureaucratic. And I personally, I'm a Twitter guy. I've been on Twitter with VCs out of California, and they're saying, no, Silicon Valley, like, hey, we don't tell people to go government. So I started sharing with them, hey, the government has some new programs out there that allows them to contract without having to go through the traditional red tape, the traditional rules of the FAR. We've got what's called non-FAR, which as far as the Federal Acquisition Regulation, that's the Bible, the government contracts. They've got non-FAR programs where tech companies can now go streamline, bring your solution, and be awarded a contract without soliciting, right? Non-competition. So, but we're not having enough conversations because the government does a really bad job of marketing all the great stuff that they do. And so I'm saying, let's bring everybody together, tech and the people from DC, and let's talk in a room. And so if you're in the tech space, if you're emerging technology, if you're a small business and you're trying to figure out like, hey, the infrastructure plan came out, right? Like most of us don't think about it. We all know about PPP, EDL, right? We got our little $1,500 checks. Well, how much of that money went to defense contractors? It was $3 trillion or $2 trillion.
Yeah, crazy.
They gave us a couple, whatever, a billion, whatever, let's say 50 billion or 100 billion out of 2 trillion.
Yeah, it's nothing compared to money. Yeah.
So when Scott, when you look at it, the government people are going to their traditional events, right? They're going to the same events in DC, Virginia. So they get those same crowd of people. The tech world is not moving.
Even if they just said to the tech world, hey, here's what problems we're trying to solve. Can someone come offer some solutions like that? That would be.
They say it, but the problem is that the government, right? Again, no knock on anybody here, but the same people that are making those decisions is a reflection of like the same people that are in Congress and the Senate, and look at the ages of the people, and they're not comfortable with technology. They're not. Look at how they bash TikTok and right, and so again, they bashed Bitcoin, but now there's a change of hearts with cryptocurrency. Now that BlackRock and JP Morgan, all those guys are applying for ETFs, there's a whole change in heart about crypto, but they're slow to adopt. And so what I'm hoping for, and my ask is, I don't want those people because they're not going to change anyway. They're all looking for retirement out the door. I'm looking for the young people that are inside of government that's saying, I see your vision. You're right. We didn't even look at that marketplace. Miami's a hotbed for all of the new programmers. I personally, Scott, I spoke at NFT Miami last year. Okay. I spoke at the conference, and we had people come from Canada moving to Miami because of the technology. So we were now attracting top talent out of other countries coming to Miami. And not just coming physically, like wanting to move here because Mayor Suarez and the city of Miami is doing an excellent job of encouraging new tech and bringing the innovation to Miami.
Yeah, and using the geographic location and opportunities and benefits of the Miami to bring it there, which makes sense. We've always had the geographical benefits, but we needed the leadership to come in. And so, they actually consider Mayor Suarez as like a cool mayor. Like he's popular in the hip hop community. He's popular in the tech community. So, I mean, that I'm just wanting the DC folks to come and see that. I want the tech folks that are moving down here and also the private equity and capital people, allocators, to show like, hey, DC is coming to us. And so let's put that. Let's bridge that gap, and then let's talk about all these amazing programs, because what I want your listeners to take away from this conversation, that I hear this and you would be surprised. Every federal agency is having problems getting businesses to respond to solicitations and grants. They cannot find you. And I know it's shocking to hear. Right. And you're saying, I'm out here. I know I was a small business. I'm still a small business. You say, I'm here. You're like, yes, there's a big disconnect between them finding you and you finding them. And so that's what we do. That's why we say we're the bridge for small businesses, bridging that gap. Well, I think it's great. The summit sounds perfect example of how you can get in front of some of these people, how you can break free. People are always like, I just need one chance. I need a little luck. This sounds like the perfect opportunity. Get in front of someone you wouldn't have known before, learn something new that you wouldn't have had known. And this is a great spot to do it in a great location in October. Yes. So 11th, 12th October, you can get to your website. I'm sure govcon.com.
Yep, GovConGiants.com. Yep.
You can see it. All right. So listen, here's what I want to really get to today. Nuts and bolts. We do see a lot of folks that are either already working in the government contracting, whatever that is. And let's say, quote, government contracting, because it's such a big space. And where do you focus on and what do you do? Okay. Communications, construction, small businesses, manufacturing, logistics. We've seen all those types of industries and businesses inside them have government contracts and come to us. And we speak a ton about cash flow and how to manage your cash flow. And in the construction space, specifically commercial construction, it has a very dynamic cash flow structure. Whether you do all the work, money goes out the door, you put an invoice in, you wait to get paid another 30 days. I mean, it is nothing to have 60, 90 days of a gap where you're funding your project or investing in it prior to waiting for payment to come. And certainly when that first payment comes, doesn't mean you're cash flow positive all of a sudden. So these folks in these businesses are managing a pretty tough cash flow cycle, and government contracting can be that way. It also doesn't have to be. There's a lot of opportunities in there. What I want to get with you today on is talk about the way that you guide some of these companies that know how to do the work. They understand the scope. They just never have done it in government before. How can they now learn from the content you put out or from you or your services to say, you know what, okay, here's where I should go in this space and why. Here's how I need to go about doing it. What's the best thing for them to do?
First thing that I would say is I found when I moved from local contracts and state contracts to federal, it really helped me with cash flow, because as a small business myself, who for context, your listeners don't know me, I had a steel erection business, pre-engineered metal buildings. I was a Seco dealer, Nucor dealer. And so I did that for about 10 years. And when I did contracts at the city level or at the state level, I found that they didn't always have the funds to pay me right away. And anyone who's ever done any type of disaster relief work, right, you will find quickly whenever there's a hurricane, people love that kind of work here in South Florida. The challenge is the government, the local government, city government's waiting for the feds to make it a disaster area so they can approve funding, so they can send money down to pay all of you, right? But in the meantime, they still have to get the stuff cleaned up. So if you've ever, been a part of any of those types of contracts, you've had 3 months, 6 months where you didn't get paid. Why? Because they actually didn't even have the money in place. Mm-hmm. So they approved the contracts without having the funding. The reason why I teach federal is because that never happens. Federal government, one, they can print money. We all know that. I'm not saying anything new to you, but the first thing is they don't approve a contract without the funding being in place first. So you will never get on a federal contract that does not have the funding. It's already approved and allocated for that. So that won't happen to you. What you find, and someone's going to say, well, Eric, no, that's not true. This happened to me. It doesn't count if you're a subcontractor. We're speaking about prime, right, Scott? Because if you're a sub, the prime contractor could have got paid and not paid you for various reasons. So I just want to give context, because I've heard all kinds of stories. I've been doing this for a while now. So, no one's going to throw a hat trick on me. But as a prime contractor with the federal government, that when you award a contract, the money's already there, right? And so now it's just meeting whatever the requirements are. And they typically up until your final billing, right? So all of your, monthly billings that you have, they typically will pay you 14 to 30 days.
Yeah.
Okay. Assuming, but you got to do everything right. Paperwork and everything has to be right. Right. So that's the caveat. Not, if your paperwork's not right, if you don't have your certified payroll submitted and things like that, then yes, that changes. So again, I can already anticipate the kind of stuff people say, oh no, this happened. If your paperwork is right, Scott, right. If you got it signed off by whoever it was, the foreman, superintendent, they signed off on it, approval, right? That person submitted it. You submit all the paperwork to the contracts team and they approved it all. From there, then it typically is 14 to 30 days.
Yeah. You touched on a couple of things there. I'm going to break that down for a second. So first, is a prime contractor the same thing as a general contractor?
No. So the prime contractor is the one who has the direct contract from the government. A general contractor can be a prime and a general contractor can be a sub.
Yeah. And so I've had a lot of subcontractors come to us and be like, well, I'm not a general contractor. I can't be a prime. And I'm like, no. Prime just means you are contracted directly. You're the contracting party.
Right.
And so that's a good delineation for some folks, particularly just starting out, to understand you don't have to have a general contractor's license to be a prime.
So actually, Scott, that's a very good point you brought up. In the federal government, you do not have to have a general contractor's license to build anything, because general contractor's license are state right? And so federal government supersedes the state. And it's interesting, Scott, that's funny you brought this up. I helped one of my small business students win a contract out in California, and the subcontractor, which was a general who was going to do the work, she was managing the project, decided that she could not be awarded that project because she did not have a general contractor's license. But this person did not understand federal regulations. And so when we were asking for their certificate of assurance, they said that they could only give a certificate of assurance to a general contractor, right? That was the law. And their insurance carrier, which I think was a family friend, because, when I tried to explain to them and I got involved and it wasn't my deal, it went to the point, Scott, where they actually called the government and tried to report us for working on a government project without a general contractor's license. And so well, yeah. I'm sorry?
Without having the general contractor's license.
For the state of California, right? Exactly. Within the state of California. Correct. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, the young lady who had the contract, she was crying because it was her first time having anything like that happen to her. And I said, look, don't worry about it. We're doing everything on the up and up. And this person just clearly is clueless. And so the contracting person from the federal government called her and said, this is why I hate working in California, because these people don't know what they're doing. And so we ended up not using that person, finding another person who ended up being cheaper, getting the work done, and she made more money.
Yeah. It's funny because the key delineation, though, is even if it's federally funded, it doesn't mean that applies.
No.
Who you're contracted with, because you could be
no.
a federally funded project, but administered.
No. Federally funded is not the same thing as a federal contract.
That's right. So we'll make that point, because I could hear someone be like, Scott and Eric said that if it's federally funded.
No. I never said federally funded. I said a federal contract, meaning you're working for a federal agency. And a lot of times, Scott, yes, certain agencies are federal and state. So, for example, you can have a DOT, right? State of Florida DOT, and then you have a DOT for, federal government DOT. So, it can be confusing, but you'll know really quickly when talking to me how to distinguish, because if it doesn't say, if there's no state name attached to it, if it's just DOT, it's DOT federal. If it's GSA, it's GSA federal. So, maybe it's confusing in the very, very beginning, like when you're first hearing about it, but really quickly, when you start looking at the database that we use, the tools that we use, all of the sources that we send you, which are all free and publicly available, you really quickly realize that, Miami and Tampa and those places are not going to be on any of my list.
Right. And a cage code is not the same. So you can have a cage code, but it's not the same as a license. Doesn't mean you can just, because you can cage code and work for federal government in a different state, you can't just step into another state. Maybe it depends. You really have to know who you're contracted with.
Yeah.
To your point.
And that's why I teach federal, because if you learn federal contracting and you understand the customers, then we work for the FAA across 5 or 6 states with no license.
Yeah.
We work for Navy Facilities Command, NAVFAC, across 4 or 5 states, no license. We work for the U.S. Coast Guard across 4 or 5 states, no license. It's not required.
Yeah. So let me ask you, what's the best way for a contractor trying to get into the government space, or they're already in it? Maybe they've done one, they got their feet wet, they understand it. To what's the best way to bid in order to be competitive on government contracts?
The best way to bid to be competitive is, one, again, stay at federal. I promise you. If you stay at federal, you get away from that low bid situation. The truth about federal that people don't realize is that about 50% of the contracts are one or no bidder. Right? Okay, maybe I'm off 50%. Maybe I'm off plus or minus 5 points, right? All right, let's say it's 45%, right? Still, it's one or no bidder. So the majority of contracts are one or no bidder. And how does that happen? Because of relationships. So how do you get the best pricing and more, because you have developed a relationship with that agency and you've proven that you have capability, competency, and somehow along the line, you've shown or demonstrated that you can help provide value to them. Again, the thing that I want to drill in everyone's head, I want you to leave with is that the government needs your help. They really, really need our help, Scott. Like they need all of us. Like if everyone listened to the show, went out and did $5 or $10 million, it wouldn't be enough.
Not even.
It wouldn't be enough. It's not enough. You know, I don't know where your listeners at. We were at a meeting a week ago in Dallas, Texas, at a military facility that had 23 contracts they need to issue before the month's out. And they only have 5 people in their list. And they know that if they give those contracts to those 5 people, which by the way, those people already are loaded up on contracts, that they would crush those companies. When I was up in Maine, same problem. They have a handful of vendors. Some of the vendors are charging double the price because there's no one there. And so they know this. There's not a single place that I've gone, Scott, where they go, oh, we got plenty of companies. We don't need any more. I haven't met that. I have not met the FBI. You know, I have sources that have been to FBI conferences, and they, unfortunately, it's a private conference. And this is my whole spiel. They say, hey, can you guys help us to find more small businesses because we need help? I was at the Navy conference in San Diego, and I got a chance to sit in a private session with the undersecretary. And he said that every federal agency is asking, how do we increase our industrial base? Everyone has the same problem. But we're not, because it's not newsworthy. It's not, you know, it like, to me, I think the federal government should be like sounding off the horn and sound the alarms. So that's why, for me, when you look at it, you know, Scott, I personally, right now, we're negotiating a couple sole source. We just had a meeting literally this week with a federal agency who said to us, they need our help. And they're going to issue us a multi-year sole source contract, $4.5 million. I've gone to 3 bases in the last 3 months that all want to issue us contracts, 5-year contracts for $4 million, because that's their limit for the program that we're in. But the point being is that no one is saying that they don't need help. No one is saying that, you know, we have all the help we need. We're fine for now.
Yeah, no.
It's not, you know, I have stacks of cards here, again, from my conferences and events. And, you know, this is, you know, this person here is from, you know, Missile Defense Agency, right? This is person from Defense Works, U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. This used to be Ingersoll Rand. You know, so, I mean, they're like screaming for help, but unfortunately, they're not doing new and innovative things. So going back to your, how do you be competitive in bidding, really it boils down to essentially doing market research, learning who the customers are, where they're at, and then reaching out to the customers and letting them know about your capabilities. And as you continue to help, the process at the federal is a little bit different from the local and state, Scott. So at the federal level, they actually do want your input. So they actually do request input from industry experts and persons like ourselves. The problem is that only the big companies do it. The Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Northrop Grumman's, like they're the only ones that actually to do this stuff. They could tell the government, oh yeah, you want to build a new space rocket? Yeah, sure, we can help you. And then they give them all the papers and white papers and reports and, all the stats and all the stuff. And then the government gives them a contract because they help the government. Right. But we as small businesses say, well, I don't have time. And, the government wants to do market research and, but when you understand the process, you realize that market research is how you get yourself in that small circle of people that become like confidants and trusted authorities to that particular office that is going to issue contracts in your field of expertise. And so when that happens, because they have so many different ways to to award contracts, I'll say sole source or non-competitive, that there's a plethora. Like you would be so. I mean, I may even have it here. I can pull up on a screen. but there's just so many varied ways that you don't know of that the government makes awards to companies that do not require going through the traditional bidding process. And so because most of us don't know this or understand it as a small business, we just think that we're wasting our time or spinning our wheels.
Well, you've touched on a couple of things there, but one thing that I do want to talk about that's not related to government contracts that you said is a concept that I call delayed gratification. And it's hard for folks in small business to actually understand and grasp. And so the most basic summary I can give of this is you're going to work really, really hard. And Eric, you and I talked about this. You've been going at this hard. You look successful. You got tons of content out there, and yet you've got 10 companies at 5 million. And the next thing I said to you is it won't be linear. And you said, that's right. It's going to go like this. You know that you're making that investment in this. It's going to happen. It's just not going to happen 5 a month every month until you get to 200. And so this is the same thing here. Get into government contracting, set a goal that's 5 years from now, and know that you're going to be there in 5 years, but you're not going to be 20% of the way there in year one and 40% of the way there in year two. It's a lot easier to grasp that concept, because if you invest the time and energy in learning and education, building that foundation for yourself, then you start to do a job, build that value, build that performance. Then you're ready. When you actually get a bigger award or one, you're actually ready to execute on it. Too often, people are chasing these big awards and they're excited about them, and you're trying to learn inside that big award and you get smoked.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And I had that happen to me. I was at an event in Texas, and this young man asked me about how to start doing construction in the federal government. And he said he was ready. So I said, okay, great. And by the way, anyone can do this out here. If you notice, I actually have this mug that I was given, and it came from the Navajo Nation Economic Summit that I spoke at recently this year. And what happens, Scott, is that the majority of the construction contracts going to small businesses are being awarded to tribally owned entities. And so these tribally owned entities have special provisions in the government to get contracts that we could not be awarded. And so one of the easiest things that any construction person can do is once you get online and you look up like a bid or something that you want to participate in, go to the site visit. More than likely, there's going to be a tribal company there. Meet with a tribal company and tell them that you are a general contractor, subcontractor, whatever, plumber, roofer, whatever you are, and that you self-perform the work. And they will give you a bid package, maybe not on that project, but on some other stuff, because they've got tons of work at that facility. And immediately they will start giving you work because they only manage projects. They don't actually do the work. So they just manage projects. And so because they're given so much work, they are always looking for new suppliers, always looking for new suppliers. And so that's a very easy way. And so this young man did that, right, Scott? And then all of a sudden they sent him a whole set of drawings. And he was like, well, I don't know how to bid this. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. You said that.
It's not a time and material contract.
Right. Yeah. But so that's that. So that's what happened, right? He was accustomed to working in whatever houses, or like you said, T&M, someone's like, yeah, we're going to paint the school, or, and he's like, oh yeah, I'll just, change the doors. But they actually gave him a set of drawings and plans that he had to bid. So going back to your point, you got to be ready for the stuff. But if you're ready, they're ready for you.
All right. So I got a quick hit list here of things we got to talk about in the government space. Let's talk about the contracting officer and the role of the contracting officer. What does someone need to know about that?
So the contracting officer role, and that's a very good question. The reason the contracting officer role is, I want everyone to know that they are the only persons that you're going to deal with throughout your project that can go to jail. They can go to jail. Why? Because a contracting officer has what's called a warrant. So they got to go to school and they get licensed, and they have this warrant that means that they can obligate the government to spend money with people, and the government has to abide by that, whatever they sign. So because they can obligate the government to spend money, they're also liable for obligating the government to spend money. And so if they do anything wrong, or if they do anything that's not above board, then they could potentially go to jail, in theory. It happens very infrequently. So I say that. I'm sorry.
It's a legit hammer over their head. I mean,
as it should be, right? Like, I mean, someone's got to be like, you can't just say, hey, government, give Scott $100 million and then they have to give it to you and then nothing happens. Like, oh, well, he didn't earn it. Oh, I'm sorry. So no, you're liable. So that's like I said, that's the hammer. But I say that because a lot of people in construction, and I'm glad we're talking because construction is my swim lane. We believe that the most important person is, because again, we're construction guys, we're in the field, we're out there working, right? Is the guys that you're going to interact with at the site, right? So whether the project manager or program manager or whatever, they could be the facilities manager, whoever you're dealing with. And I found this with my own personal crews, like personal teams that work with me. They're like, oh, that guy is really happy with us. And I said, yeah, the person, like, the guy that's out there inspecting your project is really happy with your work. But are you making the contracting officer and the contract team happy by complying with all the paperwork requirements?
Right.
And so we forget that because we see the construction guy every day. We see the project manager every day. We got a cell phone. We talk to him. Yeah, I'll be there at 8:00. My guy's going to change out the doors. We're going to paint this. We're going to fix that. We're going to put in the drywall today, put the floors in. Meanwhile, the contract people team has no idea what's going on. You haven't submitted any reports. You haven't submitted your daily reports. You haven't submitted your payroll reports. And so they are now falling out of compliance with the contract from their standpoint. Meanwhile, you're thinking you're making this person down here really happy. And so the person that has the ability to take away the contract from you is the contract officer, not the person on the field.
That's right.
And so I just want to say that because a lot of times as construction people, we lose sight of that and we are not necessarily always the best at paperwork. What I find is that companies are usually really great at one thing, doing the work or doing the paperwork. Like I don't find companies that are great at both. And again, I'm thinking your audience who's new to federal contracting, they can't be great at paperwork because that's the skills that you acquire as you've been beaten down for 10 years of doing this field. But if you're on the outside looking in, you probably don't have a really strong administrative team that just hammers paperwork away. I found very few companies who don't do federal contracting that invest in that type of administrative overhead because it's, you don't typically need it on most of your jobs. But when you get to the government side and you start doing federal, you're going to have to put a couple more bodies inside the office handling just the barrage of paperwork that you're going to be essentially overwhelmed with.
No, Eric, you make a great point about the paperwork. And so one of the things that we always talk about, and I like to delineate this, I think the government contracts, if you don't do good paperwork, will highlight the fact that you don't do good paperwork, and then you'll actually feel the pain of it because it's so necessary.
Right.
I think you need the paperwork and the administrative capabilities just as much in private work, but the general contractor or the owner developer or the bank, whoever it is, they'll be more lenient on it, or they'll just do it for you, or they'll deal with it because they need the work done too. But I think it's a necessity for your business anyway, because here's where I'll tell you where it shows up. And we've lent on these projects before, so it exactly happens in this manner. The companies that do have the best paperwork, when a problem occurs and can just pull out dailies, paperwork, submissions, emails, admin, they don't get crushed, or they are in a better position. And so in the federal government, you just need that as a primary minimum requirement in order to get paid.
Right.
So you can't go to the contract officer and be like, I did the work, you got to pay me. It doesn't run the same way. I'm going to lien your job. No. Matter of fact, most of this work, which leads to my second point, is bonding. And so let's talk about the role of bonding, needing a bond, don't need a bond, when you do, when you shouldn't, so that you can do federal work. Let's talk about that.
No, you need a bond. I mean, that's just bottom line. You got to get your bonding together. I personally, I think bonds are, they're great, right? Because for me, in order to get bonding, I had to clean up my financials. And so again, this goes back to business, that when you start a business, right, you can take a whole bunch of shortcuts. But as you start to grow a business and scale a business, start working with some of these entities, you really do have to clean your act up. And so for me, I see it as a way of helping to clean my act up, because I had to do things to look credit worthy, right? To be, bondable. And I had to, get my books together. I had to get my financials together. I had, so a lot of that stuff that I learned. One of the things that I will say that I learned early on when I first started this is I had the wrong type of accountant and the wrong type of CPA. So I didn't have a construction CPA, and I didn't even know a construction CPA existed.
Yeah.
And
you're singing my language right now.
So yeah, because I got to help you guys out. Like for me, when I went to get bonding for the first time, the guy goes, he looks at my financials, just like, what is this? Oh, my camera went out. And so when he looked at my financials, he was just like, what is this stuff? And I'm like, this is my financials and this is my taxes. Like, this is all wrong. He goes, I can't understand any of this stuff. He goes, you gotta get a construction CPA. And so I learned about getting a construction CPA. And once I did that, man, let me tell you, it was so much easier. I picked someone who had to work with companies that were like 10x my size. And it might've been more expensive, but he was able to give me insight and wisdom that I didn't know of that I needed. Mm-hmm. Right. So when I had troubles on projects and I had things that I couldn't figure out, he had already seen that with some of his clients that were doing $30-40 million in business, even though I was only doing, at first $500,000, then $1 million, then $2 million, right, in business a year. Wow. So he was able to share a lot of insights that helped me to do things. And then over and above that, I got my bonding up, right? And then he ended up helping me to structure my financials so I can, buy real estate. So I ended up being able to invest in real estate and things like that because this guy, the clientele that he worked with, he knew what the banks want to see. He knew what the lenders want to see. And so, while he was my accountant, I never had an audit. I never had, I got my bonding up to, a point where on my Seco buildings, I think they gave me up to $10 million in credit on a building. And so maybe it was 20, I don't remember, but it's some crazy number, but because of, me having to organize myself in a manner that showed I approved I had the ability to manage credit and risk for the entities.
I always analogize what you just said to our contractors. I said, look, man, you guys are on a construction site. Terrible foundation. What does that mean? It means the whole rest of the project's bad, right? Well, in business, your financial infrastructure, how you set it up, the systems you use, the reporting you use, which leads to the decisions you make, it's just like that. You have a great foundation, which makes the rest of the process easier, or you have a poor foundation, which makes the rest of the process much harder. Right. It's literally construction, and financial construction is no different than construction. You got to have a great accountant that understands the information. You need their brain to set up how you're going to build your general ledger, build your chart of accounts, manage things by project, manage things by customer. Which one? How do you do it? When do you invoice? When do you recognize revenue? Once they set all that up for you, it's very easy to have a controller or a bookkeeper plug right into that system, send it to them, and then they give you that information. And then that's easy for you. And then what you just talked about is all the benefits they can bring to you about doing it the right way, leveraging it as you grow, when to grow, what you need to know, telling you what's around the corner that you don't even know, you're not aware of. And then leveraging all that experience from everyone else that's gone on the path you've tried to go on that are their clients. They're not just, and I think a lot of people listening to this probably aren't at this point, but they're not just people to do your taxes. Like that is the biggest misconception of an accountant. And I had to hammer home on that. And I try to hammer home on cash flow. Those are the two things that I speak about as often and to anyone I possibly can. And you nailed them just right there. I mean, you talked about it in your own life, and these are necessities of government contracting, even more so to business and even more so to private.
Yeah, agree. No, I learned the lessons the hard way.
That's right. And so last thing, 8A world. Let's talk about that. We've talked about federal contracting, but you don't have to be in the 8A program. You can be. Should you be? What's your thoughts on the 8A program as it relates to what we've talked about today?
I think that the 8A program is really, I think in a lot of instances, it's been almost idolized by the government in terms of a small business program. We call it Super 8A. We've got all kind of names for it. And really, when I start understanding government contracting, the 8A program is only represents 5% of all the contracts. So, I mean, it's really peanuts. And to make it as though this is the only thing that exists out here with this, when we're issuing out trillions of dollars in contracts, I think it's doing a disservice to small businesses because of that is why I have to, every time I get on the show, I got to talk about this thing, right? The 8A program, for all its great benefits, which we leverage the 8A program, immensely, right? I don't want people to get fixated on that one vehicle, right? And because again, when you look at the whole pie, it's, represents this much sliver of the pie. And I've had companies that when you're in like really like high growth mode, they've had to leave the program because they were prohibiting them from growing, scaling, acquiring companies because all those things were impedance on them being in the program. So they were like, look, I got to get rid of this. So, it's great when you're starting out, but don't put too much emphasis on it because really learning contracting, understanding how to deal with clients and customers is where it really gets the secret sauce. It's not any particular program because they're going to continue to invent new programs. They're going to continue to create programs. I am negotiating sole source contracts without 8A or without any certification. And so the government has a way to issue contracts to businesses without any type of certification. And that is my main point that I always bring home to everybody is you do not need certifications to win. In fact, the majority of contracts go to people without certifications. And so I just want to me, that's why we're in this situation. And it's tragic because they keep putting emphasis on things that are not tied to winning. And for me, and I want to share this, this is what keeps me up, right? The government did this report recently and our government paid for this report. And it talks about top 5 countries in terms of visual snapshots with technologies. And if you see here, we're lacking behind in 37 categories of 44 categories in terms of critical technology. And so if this doesn't make your skin crawl and doesn't keep you up at night and you're talking about the safety of the nation, then you're looking at the wrong things because this is what we should all be concerned about, that right there. And so there are people like me that know this exists and that are like, okay, how do we turn the tides? And so there are programs that exist that have nothing to do with certification, that if you have a solution or a technology, they can give you a contract tomorrow, Scott, tomorrow. Like I've been at conferences where they were giving out contracts on the spot. Like here, you get a contract, you get in the room.
Do the work. Yeah.
Because they have a list of all of these areas that the government needs help, right? They literally have a list of it. And so they're like, okay, can you solve any of these problems? And you're like, yeah, I can solve that one. And here's my proposed solution. Here's a white paper. Here's a deck. And this is here's a contract to beta test if you can do it, right? Here's 150,000. Let's see if you can get it to this stage. If you get to that stage, there's another $250,000. Can you get to the next stage? There's $1 million to, so they baby step you to see if you have a solution to solve their critical needs. And so those are things that I think people should be more focused on than worry about an 8A program. By the way, another point to the 8A program is that the tribal entities, Alaska Natives, Native organizations, and tribal locally based here are doing probably about 60 to 70% of all 8A contracts. The Alaska Native tribes, which are 13 entities alone, do 29.8% of all 8A contracts in the country. Just FYI. So when people are thinking about that one group out of Alaska does 29.8% of all 8A work in the United States.
Yeah.
So now you're talking, you went from 5% to 50% of 5%, which is 2.5%. So why would you exclude the whole pie, the rest of the pie?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I think people just realize, I think they think they need to. So you mentioned certifications, and I just wanted
the government has pushed that out there, man, Scott. Yeah. It's not that they think they need to. It's that's the rhetoric that's being pushed because guess what? That's what we know. And that's what the government gets credit for, is pushing us into these programs so that they can say, hey, we have all these small businesses that are registered in these programs.
And so I want to ask you one last thing. Certifications, I'm using that as a defined term. Sure. And tell me what that means in the government program. What does certification mean?
Certifications mean essentially what I've seen is that the big push for every government organization, city, state, local, is to push people, drive small businesses into these CBE, DBE, SBE, MBE, right? Like categories so that they could say, hey, you are a small business XYZ, and they get credit and say so then they can go on and have talking points and say, we've got so many small businesses. If that worked, we would not have a 2-decade decline of small businesses.
Right. And so what I want people to take away from what you just said is you're not telling people to not get the certification. But what I think that happens too often is just because you got the certification, A, doesn't mean you're going to get contracts. B, it usually means if you think you have to go to the 8A program, there's only 2.5%, maybe 5% of the actual work.
No, it's 2.5%.
Or you could still be certified or not, just your own character, your own capability, your own performance, regardless of your certification, and you can go get 95% of the other work, of which 50% is given with either one bid or no bid.
Scott, my largest project came as a subcontractor to a tribal entity.
Yeah.
Guess what? Let me tell you guys this. For all, and this is, again, remember, I love the government. I love SBA. I love their programs, right? But they're not business people. So you got to just be careful about the advice they're giving because they've never done this stuff, right? They've never ran a business. They don't know what it's like, cash flow and hiring people and making payroll every Friday, right? Like they don't know what that's like. And so when they're telling you these things, you got to be cautious of this. So let's go back to Scott's point about the bonding, right? So when I was in my worst financial state, Scott, I had my largest contract ever, $5 million. If I was an 8A guy, right, and I went to the government to get that $5 million contract, I would have needed a $5 million bond.
Yeah.
Mind you, Scott, I was $200,000 in debt because I had faced some lawsuits in the private sector. But because I did that as a subcontractor under a tribal entity, they put up the bond for the $20 million, and all they did was give me a $5 million contract. Well, they gave me a $4 million contract for the work and a $1 million purchase order for the materials. No bond.
You're good.
No bond. So guess what? Now I had a $5 million contract on my resume, past performance and history that we successfully completed without a bond. I had the capabilities, but because of my cash flow situation, I would have never been able to get that on my own trying to attempt. And so that's when we talk about the whole 95%. You don't need to worry about chasing if you get that certification route, then you're going to think, oh, I want to get the main contract. Whereas the tribal entity, like I told you, they don't perform any work. They were looking for specialists and experts. And again, I did steel buildings. I knew what needed to be done. It was front facing of a hospital. And so they hired me for another contract for $500,000. And then they gave me this one that was, like I said, $4 million the contract and $1 million purchase order for the materials. And the purchase order literally is a PO that you just send an email. It's like, hey, like materials are there, and they just wire the money. No bond. So those are the kind of things that we don't think about, right? We're like, oh, I got to get this certification. And when I was in the round table, the majority of, when you're dealing with Boeing, Northrop Grumman, all those guys, by your revenue size, your employee size, you're a small business. They get credit for that. You don't need a certification to be small business. You just got to be small by size standards definition, and you're automatically in a category.
Eric, I got to tell you, man, this has been amazing. I think you and I might need to do this again and cover some of these other topics we could dive into instead of making everybody listen to a 4-hour podcast. Maybe we'll do a little series.
Hey, man, listen, like I said, you set it up, brother. I'll knock it down. I live this. I breathe this. This is all I do all day. So, I'm grateful. I'm like Mr. Beast on government contractor.
Yes. I'm grateful we were connected. I think the synergies in what our network and customers are looking for, just anyone, and what you do, we're going to connect together. I know of 4 or 5 people I need to introduce you right away to help find this. People that just do great work. They do awesome work, and they're just trying to find the best place to do it. And this is exactly perfect for them. GovCon Giants, Eric Coffie. You can find him on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. He's got a great summit coming up in Miami, October 12th. Go to govcongiants.com, find it on his website, attend. Eric, I'm going to talk to you about coming there as well. I'm going to put it on our calendar, so I want to bring some folks. And you guys have watched Construction MF'ers. listen to us on our podcast. I really appreciate you. If you found any value in this, please share the message, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast. Make sure you go register with Eric as well. He's got a great YouTube channel and a great podcast. Lots of great information and content out there. Eric, anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love your name. It's amazing. I think it's right. Look forward to working with your organization in the future where, again, we're looking for great partners all the way around. We're looking for great team members. We're planning on bringing right now, the Department of Energy is coming out. They were the biggest beneficiary to the last infrastructure plan. They're going to be out speaking at my conference, talking about all the money's flowing out. The Economic Development Agency, they've got billions of dollars that they're trying to give away to small businesses that they just looking for set up tech hubs, STEM programs, any type of program affecting distressed communities. They're going to be there as well. And then MBDA, which is first time that they actually became a certified government agency, minority business development agency. It's their first year of becoming an official government agency. And they got a whole nother pot of money where they're doing amazing things as well for small businesses. So again, I just want to, I want to share those nuggets that I have and my relationships that I have with some of these people out here with all of you guys. And so that's what we're looking forward to doing at the summit coming up. So again, stay interested. Don't go away. It's a long journey, but it's well worth it. The roadway is paved with gold. I promise you that. By the way, the journey's long no matter what. So stop thinking it's short and just jump on the right one. So, that's right, baby. Eric, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate all you're doing for our collective communities, small businesses out there, and the folks just on this podcast educating. People are going to listen to this. It's going to be great. And so thank you, bro. Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate you, Scott. Thanks. Take care. Take care, everyone. All right, everybody. Take care. Thank you very much.